going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. A lot of our wide receiver targets from last week went off, but few elite wide receivers are still off to a pretty slow start, so figured it would be valuable if we started off this video by going over them. The 5 elite wide receivers I want to talk about today are Drake London, Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas Jr., Nico Collins, and AJ Brown. Drake London is 13th in expected fantasy points per game, but only 55th in actual fantasy points. Ladd McConkey, 36th in expected fantasy points, 40th in actual points per game. Brian Thomas Jr., 3rd in expected fantasy points per game, 51st in actual fantasy points per game. Nico Collins, 21st in expected, 44th in actual. And then AJ Brown, 83rd in expected fantasy points per game, 94th overall. The one that I'm least worried about is Drake London. The man had 15 targets in week 1. He had multiple end zone targets, probably actually did catch one of them. They just kind of couldn't see the angle, and the original call was incomplete, so they went with that. Then the offense, he was super efficient in week 2, but they threw the ball 21 times. And when an offense throws the ball 21 times, like we'll get to with AJ Brown, it's kind of difficult for any one wide receiver to have an amazing game. I mean, yeah, they threw it 21 times. They ran it 39 times. That is not going to happen. Probably maybe like 1 or 2 more times this season. But there's a chance it doesn't happen another time this season to that level. London, one of the most featured players in the NFL in the red zone, clearly can command 12 to 15 targets when games stay close. We saw that in week 1, and we love that in fantasy, right? When they get close, they're going to London. When they get down, they're going to London. He has the upside to have, 12 to 15 targets, but isn't just like a PPR merchant that'll never score a touchdown. He can have games where he has 15 targets, 12 receptions, 2 touchdowns, and that gives him a 30-point ceiling every week. Again, 0 long-term concerns with Drake London, a very clear top 10 wide receiver rest of season. If you're looking for an alpha wide receiver to go after, he probably is the number 1 target, but I would say the next 2 are also very good as well. I'm also not worried about Ladd McConkey. Sure, the expected fantasy points don't look great, and you can be like, oh yeah, he's not really underperforming the volume. It's more that the volume is lower than we were expecting. But again, it's a 2-game sample. You can look at a lot of different wide receivers, a lot of great wide receivers over their career, and pick out 2-game samples where they're like 70th in volume. That's just going to happen. And if you watch that game on Monday night, I think a lot of you did, you remember the broadcast saying, yeah, Ladd was open for what would have been, I don't remember, maybe like a 50, 55-yard touchdown. If they hit on that play, then I bet you at no point in this entire season is anyone even slightly concerned about Ladd, right? If they hit on that very long play, he has a long touchdown, he has what would have been close to 100 yards and a score, you wouldn't be worried. It's just that he happened to not see him. It happens to be that Quentin Johnston hits for a long touchdown this week. It's just very clear when you watch the game that he is their top wide receiver, not only a wide receiver that Justin Herbert trusts, but also one that is just clearly more talented than the other wide receivers on the team. And you're not worried about a role change, right? So when you have Quentin, when you have Keenan Allen, you're worried about Keenan Allen kind of, regressing as the season goes along just because he's old and he can break down. But then also Quentin Johnston, because we know talent-wise, he's talented physically and he can get there, but the hands aren't always great. He makes mistakes on routes. And so if there were 2 wide receivers that would kind of lose volume as the season goes along, with the ascension of Trey Harris, with the ascension of Keandre Lambert-Smith, which we think they're going to be more involved, it's not Ladd McConkey. It's Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston. So you're not concerned about that long term. We also know the Chargers have been trailing for exactly 0 seconds this season. The Chargers are not going to go undefeated this year. They're going to lose some games, and they're going to win some games where they were trailing at some point. And when we get that game script from the super pass heavy Chargers team, they've been super pass heavy when winning this season. You don't think that if they have some games where they get down 10, 14 points, my goodness, if they get down by 3 scores, they're going to be super pass heavy. Ladd's going to be absolutely lighting up the scoreboard. And he just hasn't scored yet. And it's maybe you're concerned about, you spent a 3rd round pick probably on him and you're like, oh my goodness, like Quentin Johnson scoring touchdowns, keeps looking to Keenan Allen. Let's not forget that last season, Ladd still led the team with 8 targets inside the 10-yard line. Like, he was someone that last season was getting open at a high rate and Justin Herbert trusted. So I know early on in this 2-game sample, we've seen Quentin Johnson score 3 touchdowns. We've seen Keenan Allen be looked at twice in the red zone. It's not that they're never going to throw the ball to Ladd. So the volume is going to be there. The touchdowns going to be there. He's not going to score 3 or 4 touchdowns this season. He's probably going to be in that like 7 to 8 range. He's not going to be like 12 touchdowns, but it's going to go along with likely 100 receptions. He's probably going to return low-end wide receiver 1 production. So if anyone panics on Ladd, take advantage of that. I am more than happy to trade for Ladd McConkey. He's going to have a great season. Again, game script hasn't been perfect, and it's not like they're going to lose a lot of games, right? But there's going to be plenty of times this season where they find themselves trailing a little bit, and when he is more featured in the red zone, when they're just throwing the ball at this high rate, where he's going to rack up 7, 8, 9 receptions to go along with a touchdown, and you won't be worried after he finally has one of those games. After London and Ladd, I think the next most appealing is Brian Thomas Jr., but again, as we kind of go along here, my levels of concern do increase. So I have more concerns about Brian Thomas Jr. than those two, at least, especially given the fact that it's possible you spent kind of that like 12, 13 turn on him, whereas like Ladd, you spent probably like a mid 3rd round pick. So like draft capital wise, we need more production from Brian Thomas Jr. than we need, slightly more than London, and then we need more than Ladd. But yeah, like, I'm concerned about Brian Thomas Jr. I'm just less concerned than the general public is. People are burying this kid. I mean, it is very popular right now to be talking about, because again, he's out there making business decisions, like it's a play over the middle of the field, and he's like, I don't know about that one. Maybe we can let that go incomplete. I'll define another day, which I don't know. It's like, you can blame him and be like, listen, like, you're in the NFL, you have to try and make that catch. But also, I don't know if I'm making that catch over the middle of the field. But it's not great seeing him not winning contested catches. It's all just a little bit frustrating when you watch the games and you're like, make a play. Like, can you please go out there and just make a play? I think everyone saw that horrible drop he had. Wouldn't have scored a touchdown, but that like lost them the game, right? Like, he wouldn't have scored on that play. But I suppose it's possible if everything was perfect, he would have made someone miss and score. But everyone saw the horrible drop at the end at the goal line in their last game. There's also this report about this nagging wrist injury. And so the narrative and the sentiment around Brian Thomas Jr. is very, very bad right now. You hear the injury, you see the lack of production, you're worried. If you have Brian Thomas Jr., you're worried. So I would say if the person that has him is very worried and is sending offers, right? If you like just receive just like an unprompted offer, just trying to give you Brian Thomas Jr., even if they're asking for a lot, understand the underlying there. No one sends offers to trade away their 1st round pick. So if you see that, you're like, oh my goodness, this person's actually willing to trade away someone who has immense value. I would be more worried if he like was out there running empty routes, or if the Jaguars were not utilizing their wide receivers at a high rate. But the man has target shares of 24% and 29% through 2 weeks. Those are both great numbers. He's running a route on 91% of dropbacks, so that is exceptional and is what you would expect from an alpha wide receiver. He is 6th among wide receivers in air yards. So while air yards is kind of a flawed stat, we still like to look at it saying, okay, these 24 to 29% target rates are not coming right next to the line of scrimmage. They are coming deep downfield. And when you have an elite target share that's also coming downfield, that elevates your ceiling a lot in fantasy. He's 3rd among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points. So for an average wide receiver on an average team, getting the volume he is getting, he should have the 3rd most fantasy points right now. And realistically, we expect him to be an above average wide receiver on an above average team. So the volume's exceptional. Only Neighbors and Devonta Adams are seeing stronger volume. And here's the kicker. Guess how many teams are utilizing their wide receivers more than the Jacksonville Jaguars this season so far? 0. No team in the NFL has given more fantasy valuable targets. So again, it's not saying who has thrown the most total targets to wide receivers. It is, what is the fantasy upside of these targets? A target 50 yards downfield is worth more than a target 3 yards downfield. A target from the 5-yard line, 5 yard lines to the end zone, is worth more than a target at the 50-yard line. So there is better volume going to Jacksonville Jaguars wide receivers than any other team in the NFL. The problem is Dyami Brown and Parker Washington are currently the two wide receivers leading this team in yardage. That's just not going to hold long term. There's a 0% chance that Dyami Brown and Parker Washington are the two leading receivers on this team by the end of the season. And let's be honest, Brian Thomas Jr. is not going to finish the season with a 26% catch rate. That is laughably low. I bet you over the rest of his career, like he doesn't have a month-long stretch where he has a 26% catch rate. So he's getting unlucky on these targets right now. He's an exceptional player. If we look back to what he did last season, like I feel like people sometimes, I don't know, have very short memories and they're like, yeah, he was good with Mac Jones, but he wasn't that good. Maybe it was kind of a fluke. Do you know how many wide receivers since 1965 have at least 1,250 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns in their rookie season? 3. Randy Moss, Odell Beckham Jr., and Brian Thomas Jr. And now that wide receiver, Brian Thomas Jr., is seeing the third best volume among all wide receivers on the team featuring wide receivers the most in the league. And people are losing their minds because they think he's a bust. I think we need to take a step back and relax a little bit on this one. I was also curious. I was like, all right, let's look back to Randy Moss, right? If you got Randy Moss right now, you're not too worried, right? What did he do in his first 2 games of his sophomore season? He averaged 3.5 receptions for 55 receiving yards per game, 0 receiving touchdowns, scored fewer fantasy points than Brian Thomas Jr. because Brian Thomas Jr. had the rushing touchdown. What did Randy Moss do that season? Over 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns. So relax. Do not panic on Brian Thomas Jr. I will say this, though. He will be shadowed by Derek Stingley this week. There's not that many corners in the NFL that shadow, honestly, nowadays, but are corners that we actually worry about when they shadow. This is one of them. That's one of the toughest matchups there is. So I do think Brian Thomas Jr. is an exceptional target. Again, London Lad, Brian Thomas Jr. is probably how I'd order it. But if you want it, like if the person in your league is freaking out about Brian Thomas Jr., I still think he's a low-end wide receiver 1 with mid to high-end wide receiver 1 upside this season. I still think in his range of outcomes is finishing as like the wide receiver 3 or 4 overall, even given the start that he has had. So I think it's a great week for like a classic low ball and hope for a dud. Like honestly, send them something where you're like, they're probably not going to accept this. If they do, I'm thrilled. If they don't, just cross your fingers that Stingley shuts him down maybe 3 weeks in a row of a dud and they're like, okay, and you're the name they'll look at, right? You're the person that sent them an offer. They're going to be like, all right, maybe I still don't want to do that low ball offer, but maybe I am willing to get a deal done for him because maybe I'm super frustrated. So I think that's a great opportunity. There's a chance that it goes off against Stingley and people look at this and they're like, oh yeah, he was having the third best volume. He had one of the best rookie seasons of all time. And then he just crushed a shutdown corner. We probably were overreacting and then you can never get him. So I think that still exists. I don't think you're sending like Wan'Dale Robinson for him being like, oh, you're going to do it. No, you still have to send something very good. He is still a low end wide receiver 1 in most people's minds, but maybe not the person you're playing with. So I put a feeler out there, see what it'll take. I'm slightly more concerned about Nico Collins. I think Scott Barrett had a really good tweet highlighting how this offense has changed so far this year. And it's not great. I think everyone knows that play action, pre-snap motion, they're 2 very easy ways to increase offensive success. The data is overwhelmingly clear that both of them are great. You should utilize both at a high rate and that good offenses have both. Well, the Texans have dropped from league average last season to bottom 4 in both, and they also have Nico running far less intermediate routes. We really like intermediate routes in fantasy. If everything is short and everything is long, you're looking at low upside and low hit rate, and we really don't like that combination. When you have a ton of intermediate routes, those are the best routes, the most fantasy upside routes that we can have. We want our wide receivers running those at a high rate. His rate is far down from what it was last season. So the new offensive coordinator is just running a worse offense, and Nico's role in the offense, even though it's still him as a clear number one wide receiver, his role is just a little bit less fantasy relevant than it was last year. So that's not great. The one silver lining, though, is that like Brian Thomas Jr., he's not going to average a 38%. I mean, Brian Thomas Jr. is at 26%, but he's not going to have a 38% catch rate all season. I don't care if you're a horrible wide receiver with a horrible quarterback. You don't average a 38% catch rate, and Nico and Stroud are both good. So that's going to go way up. He also is featured in the red zone. He has all three of the team's targets inside the 10-yard line, 4 of the 5 inside the 20. So every time they get close, they're going to go to him. Even when you have these rookie wide receivers starting to step up, it is going to be Nico Collins the vast majority of the time in the red zone. So even if the offense isn't quite as strong as expected, even if his role isn't quite as good, he's still the clear number one wide receiver. He's probably going to have double-digit touchdowns. And so I think the people, because there was a lot of people in the community that thought, he had a top 3 ceiling this season, that you should be taking him in the mid-first round. That was always a little bit aggressive. I don't think there was really a case for taking him over Puka or Neighbors. I think those people are just clearly wrong. I just don't think you can even view that as a possibility anymore. But I still think you could buy low on him. I still think that people who have him might be frustrated. Maybe they got him, in the second round, like maybe he kind of fell a little bit, and they're like, maybe they went wide receiver. They're like, I just don't really want this guy. In terms of wide receivers that I would still absolutely value him over, Egbuka, Sutton, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, Garrett Wilson, Evans, Tet, I'd 100% still value Nico Collins over that grouping, and that makes him a low-end one. So again, even though the role isn't as strong, he's still just objectively in that like wide receiver like 10 to 15 range, and is still someone you're starting every week, has immense upside. So if someone is going to freak out about that and you can capitalize on that, do it. Then we have A.J. Brown. And I'll be honest, I'm worried. And I'm far more worried about A.J. Brown than I am all the other wide receivers we talked about today. Not in his talent. He's still very much a stud. Not in the target share, because he's still probably going to finish in that like 25 to 28% target share range, which is elite. My worry is that the Eagles have 22 and 23 pass attempts through 2 weeks, and that's in 3 and 4 point wins. Like when we were talking about Drake London, it's like, yeah, they had a 21 pass attempt game. That's not going to happen the vast majority of the time. But when it does happen, you're not expecting a lot from wide receivers. Even if you have a high target share, if you're throwing the ball 21 times, you're not going to have that many targets. If that is going to be the reality every week for the Eagles, and not that they're not like, they're going to have games where they are in like the upper 20s to 30s, right? That's going to occur. But if we're seeing a ton of games where they're below 25 total pass attempts, you just need such an insane target share from A.J. Brown to the point where it's like he needs to be the best wide receiver in the NFL. I don't want to say to be fantasy relevant, but to have anywhere near the ceiling you were hoping for when you drafted him. And again, it's not like they're ripping teams apart right now. I would get it if they had won their first 2 games by like 13, 14 points each. But these are close games. And even in close games, they are choosing to play super conservative, to take very few shots downfield, to just not turn the ball over, to run it at a high rate, to be very conservative in the passing attack and say, we don't need 9 yards per pass attempt. We can be very safe, just move the ball slowly downfield, know that when we get into 3rd and short, 4th and short, we're always converting. And I mean, do you blame them? Right? Like it really feels like if they keep running the offense this way, they're going to lose like at most 3 games. They're going to be the number 1 seed. They just came off a Super Bowl win. Like it makes sense that this offense is clearly working. They're clearly going to win football games. Why would they change? But in fantasy, they now have 253 total passing yards through 2 weeks, no passing touchdowns, because again, why would they change? Why would they go pass heavy in the red zone? Why on earth would you do that? Just give the ball to Saquon until you get inside the 5 and then start the tush push. Like that's their offense every time they get close. So now we're capping the touchdown upside of everyone who is not Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley. And when they're between the 20s, when they're not in the red zone yet, why would they push the ball downfield? Why would they risk an interception when they can pretty consistently gain 4 to 6 yards every single play, whether they're running it or passing it? Why would you change, right? So It's concerning. No team is utilizing wide receivers at a lower rate than the Eagles. That is counting one game without their starting tight end. So even in a game where they did not have Dallas Goedert, when you're expecting A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith to be featured every single time they drop back, they still did not do that in a close game against a team that can actually beat them and score points against them. Like, even if you had 100% of the Eagles' wide receiver volume so far this season, that would result in 16 expected points per game. Do I think that number goes up over time? Yes, but that is highly concerning that if you were the only wide receiver on the team getting 100% of the volume, you'd average 16 PPR points per game. That's not enough. So there'll be games where A.J. Brown goes off, Devonta Smith goes off, but there's going to be a ton of games this season like these first 2 weeks. And so you just want someone less volatile at this point. Like, they've been volatile in the past. At this point, they're very, very, very volatile, but the low end is just hitting at such a high rate that, like, yes, better days are coming for the Eagles wide receivers, but I would not be trading for them because you don't want this high of a rate of duds because you have to win, 3 games in a row to win the fantasy championship? Like, at this point, do you expect 3 games in a row from Eagles wide receivers to not dud? No, you might expect 2 duds in that kind of sample there. So I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be trading for Eagles wide receivers right now. So that's a look at the top end for wide receiver. Let's rapid fire some other options you have specifically at running back. I think it's an interesting week for running back. For those of you who are 2-0, I think TreVeyon Henderson is the number 1 trade target. He was semi-benched last week. He still played, but he was pretty much benched for not 1, not 2, but 3 holding penalties in pass protection. Y'all were just livid. Like, you were really on me for saying that Hampton is a slightly better pass protection prospect than Henderson. You were just like, absolutely not, Nick. Henderson is the greatest prospect we've ever seen. Through 2 weeks, it does seem like Hampton is the better prospect for pass protection. Seems like that was the correct call. But here's the thing. When we're looking at Henderson, the short term does not look amazing. Like, I do not trust Henderson this week. I have no idea what's going to happen. I would trust him more if, Gibson and Stevenson looked bad. And it's like, even though he's making these mistakes and he's a rookie, he's still by far the best running back on the team. And I think that, long term, he is easily the best running back on this team. But Stevenson still looks solid. Gibson still looks very explosive. And so there's no need for the Patriots to go out there and be like, we're giving Henderson 80% of the touches this week. There's no need to do that, especially when he's making these huge mistakes in pass protection. That is the role we need him to win, and it's not going to happen in the short term. So if you are 2-0, because if you're 2-0, you can easily afford to lose the next 2 weeks. So you can give up running back production right now, because that's probably what they're going to ask for in return. You can give up some running back production right now to take on Henderson, who in the second half of the year, I do think will clearly be the lead on early down, will be the guy on passing downs, and will have immense upside in fantasy. You can afford that because you can afford to lose the next 2 games and not be too worried overall. And if you happen to trade for Henderson and even go 1-1, you're 3-1, you're looking very strong. So if you're 2-0, I think he's a great guy to go after because, again, second half of the year, I think he's going to be really, really, really good. But if you are 0-2, you can't trade for Henderson because I don't think you should really be starting him right now. For those of you who are 0-2, you're on the other end of the spectrum. I do think that the top trade target is Jordan Mason. Aaron Jones is going to miss the next month of the season, which means Mason will be close to featured. Maybe he doesn't get 100%, but he's probably going to have 90% of the volume on that backfield. He's probably going to project each week in that running back, I'll say 8 to 15 because a lot will depend on exactly what happens this next week. But I wouldn't be shocked if he's a top 10 running back over the next 3 games because their next 3 games are home versus the Bengals, home versus the Steelers, who I think have allowed over 30 points in each of the first 2 weeks, and then home versus the Browns. That is a dream schedule for the Vikings, even without McCarthy, even without Addison for 1 game, but with Addison for 2 games. This team can still put up a lot of points. McCarthy's not been playing that good. So I think even with backup quarterback play, this is still going to be a solid offense. I think they're still going to score points. I think they can win these games. I think they can win all 3 games. There is a world where Jordan Mason is a top 7 running back over the next 3 weeks, and that is what you need if you're 0-2. It is likely that you don't have 2 running backs that are just going nuclear if you're 0-2. And so I'd love to give up wide receiver depth. You know, we build very deep teams at wide receiver. If you could give up some of that wide receiver depth to get Mason, that would be perfect. If it ends up costing you, though, maybe you have Henderson, maybe you have Harvey, and you're like, Nick, I can't be starting these two. I need running back production now. It is possible that the person that has Mason, has a decent record, is willing to be on the other end. If you're 0-2 and they're 2-0, and you have Henderson and they have Mason, then there's absolutely a chance that they'd be willing to do a swap for that. Now, again, I would prefer Henderson long-term, but if you're 0-2 and the next 3 weeks matter a ton, I would very much prefer Jordan Mason over the next month. And who knows? It's a hamstring injury from like a 30-year-old running back that's had a lot of injuries in the past. You don't think it's possible that Aaron Jones either like doesn't fully recovers a little bit slower than expected, isn't as good? Like, Mason could just be the top running back this season. So he's a great guy to go after if you're 0-2. And if it costs you to give up some of these, high-end running back prospects, if it costs you to go with like a Henderson, I think it's worth doing. I would love, again, to do it for wide receiver. The clear number one top sell at running back in my eyes was a clear sell last week, and you probably missed your opportunity, but it's Tyrone Tracy Jr. I mean, by a mile, he's a top sell. Like, I don't know if you can really get anything for him, but if you can get anything, I would do it. Scadaboo is going to be the number one running back on that team. At this point, Tracy Jr. is back. Like, I already think Cam is the number one running back. I don't think it was like randomness. I don't think it was game script. I think Cam Scadaboo is the number one running back now on the Giants. So you now have a handcuff running back on the Giants. That's not very valuable. So if you can get anything for Tyrone Tracy Jr., maybe there's a believer out there in your league, do it. I will close with the heavily requested Omarion Hampton take. Unfortunately, it's probably not everything you want to hear if you drafted Hampton. There are some positives. Now, he's 17th among running backs in usage. He has 100% of the team's carries inside the 5 and 10 yard line. He's actually been on the field for 100% of the plays inside the 10, which makes sense. He's a physical freak, 4.4 speed, 221 pounds, first round draft pick. Like, all that makes sense, right? Problem is, the production hasn't been there. And it's not because the offense hasn't been good, right? Like, the Chargers are a fantastic offense. There is still immense touchdown upside every single week for Omarion Hampton. Of course, if he scores that rushing touchdown at the goal line, you're not as worried, but he was stuffed at the goal line. The bad news here is that this is clearly, like, I thought after 1 week, maybe it was the Chiefs, right? They played the Chiefs in week 1. The passing game was working. You know that you can't just run the ball against the Chiefs unless you're the Eagles. You can't just run the ball every play and expect to win. But they did it again last week in a game that they were winning again. And again, they've trailed for 0 snaps this season, and they're still going at a very, very high pass rate. So they're clearly going to throw the ball at a super high rate this season. That is not good for the running backs. Najee was also up to a 35% snap share last week. I think in the short term, we expect a 60-40 split between those two. Najee got 10 touches. Like, if they're going to be really pass heavy and then give Najee 10 touches per week, that starts to squeeze out the ceiling for Omarion Hampton. Overall, though, I do still think he's a lock to remain the lead back all season. There's just no scenario in my mind where, unless he gets injured, obviously, that Najee Harris is the number one running back on this team. So Hampton's still going to be the number one running back on one of the best offenses in the NFL. He's probably going to remain the goal line back. I think it's possible that, like, Najee mixes in from time to time, but I do not think there's a world where it's Najee every time at the goal line. Like, Hampton is still a physical freak that's going to be at the goal line. So I still think Hampton's going to have double-digit touchdowns by the end of the season. So while I no longer think he finishes as like a top 7 running back, I just don't think that's going to happen anymore. I do still think right now he's a low end 2. I think every week you treat him as a low end 2 right now. And then he'll finish the season in that running back like 10 to 15 range. I still think that's going to happen. I think he's going to peak later in the season. Again, he is still a rookie. This will be his 3rd career start, obviously, in week 3. So in the short term, it's not going to be what you were hoping, but in the long term, probably still not what you were hoping, but still very good. And I think it's still going to end up to where, like, if you took him at that like 2-3 turn, you're definitely not pumped right now. You're definitely not pumped probably in week like 6 or 7. But I think as the season goes on, you'll look back at that and be like, yeah, it probably was ended up being worth it at this point, because I think he's going to be great, midway through and towards the end of the season. But it also comes down to your record. I would be very, very, very willing to trade for him if I was 2-0. If I was 0-2, Because people aren't like giving up Omarion Hampton for like a wide receiver, right? People are asking for running back in return. So if you're 2-0, you can afford to take that potential hit. If you're 0-2, again, you're probably not 0-2 because you drafted unbelievable running backs. So to have to give one up to get Hampton and probably give up a running back and a receiver to get Hampton, I don't think it's worth it because you risk going 0-3, 0-4, and then even if he starts to break out after that, you've dug yourself into too much of a hole where it's not worth it. So I would still want to be at a better record, at least 1-1 to trade for him. And I don't think I would want to trade him away because it's too like the value's kind of gone in the market right now to where you took him in the 2-3 turn. He's hurting you. Maybe you're 0-2 or you're 1-1. Now you're going to trade him away for clearly not the value. Like if someone's going to give you, a running back to hit, someone's going to give you like Jacobs for him. Well, yeah, you're going to take that. You're going to take another running back in that general range of the draft that hit, but someone's not going to do that. Someone's going to give you a low ball offer, and to secure a low ball offer after 2 weeks from like a first round running back in the NFL draft on a great team, it's a losing strategy to trade away your top end players after 2 weeks and secure worse value. It's just a losing strategy over time. I would rather just hope he has a good game. If you want to trade him away, hope he plays well and then trade him away after that. So if you want to see exactly where I value all these guys the rest of the season and exactly what players I have ranked ahead of and behind them, you can see that all on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. The rest of season rankings are updated every Tuesday, and then I do smaller updates throughout the week as news comes out. I'll be back tomorrow to go over the week 3 rankings, and then Friday to go over my favorite underdog plays this week. That'll do it for this one, though. Please remember to subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.